My name is Amanda Fialk. I am a partner and the Chief Clinical Officer at the dorm. Today, we are here with David, one of our clinical supervisors at the dorm, who is such a valued team member. And he is going to be talking about racial trauma and mental health implication when it comes to our Hispanic and Latin American communities. Just to give you a little bit of background about David, and I am reading his bio, but I'm also going to throw some other stuff in. David truly has an impressive background in mental health care, previously serving as a residential counselor at Silver Hill Hospital in the substance use and addiction unit and in the DBT unit as well. At the dorm, he excels in so many things, but particularly in helping clients find their unique strengths. He leads sessions and groups through multiple therapeutic modalities, including CBT approaches, DBT approaches, coaching, psychoeducational groups. On a personal note, David is certified in stress and rescue scuba diver, and his most prized experience has been a 17-day trek in the Himalayas, where he reached the Mount Everest base camp. Throughout his career, David has been passionate about helping historically marginalized communities, including the LGBTQ+ community, develop skills to cope with societal adversities, which is why we are so grateful that David has agreed to talk with us and present on this topic today, so that we all can do what we should be doing as mental health professionals to recognize and address the unique challenges that Hispanic and Latin American communities face today when it comes to mental health. So with that said, I am going to turn this presentation over to David, and we will reconvene following his presentation to have an interactive dialogue.
Perfect. Thank you, Amanda. I really appreciate it. And thank you to everyone who is on this call and has made the time to be present. My name is David. Thank you for coming. My hope is that you will learn something today that you may not know, or we can deepen the conversation and also what it is that you do know. Part of moving beyond, I think, just a conversation here within the confines of this space, my hope is that you can maybe feel inspired, right, to have this conversation at your dinner table, with your family, with your friends, and we can together work at, I think, just making a kinder world and one that's a little bit more informed. I am a first-generation American. My father is from South America and my mother is from the Caribbean. I am bilingual in English and Spanish, and I do identify as a gay man. I do share all of this with you to highlight my own intersectionality as we begin this conversation in terms of the implications and factors that definitely play a role into the lives of every individual person and how they, seek treatment and what are the barriers that come into the access to getting there. And I also invite each of you to reflect on your own intersectionalities and how this plays a role as well in your line of work and your relationships. So thank you. We will begin. All right. So our learning objectives today will cover learning how these communities face unique institutional and systemic barriers that may impede access to mental health services, discussing the long-term impacts of racial trauma on mental health, and reviewing the techniques that we can use to support Hispanic and Latin American clients in therapy. We will navigate this conversation and this discussion as well by addressing the barriers to care, the effects of receiving adequate care, and then where we go from here and how we can make improvements. I felt it necessary and important to also highlight what it means to be Hispanic, what it means to be Latino or Latina, and also what Latinx stands for as a new kind of wave of information is coming forward. Hispanic, Spanish-speaking persons from countries that speak Spanish, this is language-based. Latino or Latina, people who are from Central and South America and the Caribbean, what encompasses Latin America, and this is more geography-based. Latinx is a gender neutral and non-binary term which is used to define people from Latin American and Spanish descent. Just to give you one kind of an example, right? Brazilians are considered to be Latino based on geography, but they are not considered to be Hispanic as their native language is Portuguese. And so that dates back, right, to colonialism and so much history that has gone on through, I think, the migration of the world, right, in the New World. Languages spoken by these individuals and by these people include Spanish, Portuguese, different varied dialects, as well as indigenous languages. For an example, in South America, one of the languages that is spoken by the indigenous communities is one called Quechua, which is spoken in Bolivia, Peru, for an example. What is represented in the United States? According to the 2020 census data, there are 62.1 million Hispanics living in the United States. Hispanics represent 18.9% of the total US population and is the second largest ethnic group after non-Hispanic whites. The 5 largest Hispanic groups represented in the United States encompass Mexican, 64.9%, Puerto Rican, 9.2%, Cuban at 3.7%, Salvadorian 3.6%, and Dominicans at 3%. Most Hispanic Americans identify as Christian, that's 77%, and 48% are Roman Catholic. Some relevant statistics. In 2019, the US Census Bureau reported that 71.8% of Hispanics, in comparison to 94.6% of non-Hispanic whites, had high school diplomas or higher. The US Bureau of Labor in 2021, the data reported that 22.9% of Hispanics, in comparison to 15% of non-Hispanic whites, worked within service occupations. It is significant that Hispanics have the highest uninsured rates of any racial or ethnic group within the United States as we begin to examine the barriers to care. Racial trauma. The most anti-immigration period in the United States was 2005, when about 300 anti-immigration bills were introduced by Congress. By 2015, there were 1,500 bills present. Latinx immigrants are prone to experiencing traumatic events throughout their immigration process. Latinx immigrants are likely to experience high levels of poverty, political persecution, natural disasters, kidnapping, rape, and sexual violence. When immigrants arrive to the US, they experience high levels of stress related to racism, ethnocentrism, and nativism. Fear of deportation, family fragmentation, economic hardship, and trauma have also impacted these communities. And there are also language barriers, which can make communicating with providers very difficult. And it also can widen the margin for incorrect treatment measures. Stigma. La ropa sucia se lava en casa. So this means, by direct translation, the dirty clothes we wash in the home, right, at home. This is something in a saying that could be similar to not airing dirty laundry. So the idea that whatever goes on within the family system or goes on within the individual as a extension of the family stays within the 4 walls of the house, right? I think it's important to highlight that while here in the United States, we do have an individualistic society, most countries on the exterior end of that tend to be pluralistic or collectivist, right? And so that encompasses Latin America and why there is so much importance placed on community and on family. Latinx communities have an added layer of experiencing mental health issues due to the stress of facing discrimination and existing between cultures. Speaking about mental health can be seen as taboo within the community And this stigma can lead to a lack of accurate information and a perseveration, right? Or I can't say the word now. Preservation of what is. Many Hispanics are likely not to seek treatment due to stigma influenced by cultural and religious views. And mental illness and suicide being seen and caused by sin, a lack of faith, and the idea that things can be cured by prayer discourage the individual family from seeking further help. It's important, I think, to note, right, that tradition and culture can be very difficult to shift. And when we look at the implications here of treating members from the Latinx community, from the Hispanic Latino community, these are, traditions, culture, trends that can last generations. And so it can be very challenging in doing the day-to-day work, especially as we look to broaden and educate. Culture, or la cultura, you look at machismo. In Latinx culture, the term machismo describes a strong or exaggerated sense of manliness, an assumptive attitude that virility, courage, strength, and entitlement to dominate are attributes or concomitants of masculinity. And Marianismo in many Latin American or Hispanic cultures encapsulates an idolized traditional feminine gender role characterized by submissiveness, selflessness, chastity, hyperfemininity, and the acceptance of machismo in males. What this can then breed is a toxic masculinity, which I'm sure is a conversation many of us have had in our offices or again amongst peers, and what that can look like in day-to-day society and culture. There's a lot of research that's pointing to the violence and or aggression, right, and aggressive behaviors that are stemming out of what can be identified as machismo, specifically within this community. Looking at LGBTQIA+ communities within the Latinx cohort, according to a 2019 study by the Regional Information Network on Violence Against LGBTQIA+ people in Latin America and the Caribbean, 4 LGBTQIA+ people are murdered every day in Latin America and the Caribbean. And most of these deaths take place in the home. In the 5 years leading up to 2019, over 1,300 LGBTQIA+ people were murdered. Of those cases, almost 12% were committed by people that knew the victims. Criminalization of the Latinx population. More than 60% of the prison population are people of color. Latinos represent 19% of those who are incarcerated. According to the US Surgeon General's report on mental health, racial and ethnic minorities have less access to mental health services than non-Hispanic whites. They are less likely to receive needed care and more likely to receive poor quality care when provided with treatment. People with mental illness are also overrepresented in the criminal justice system. Here, I would like for all of us to take a moment just to watch this clip that I found. I think it's such a poignant interview, but this clip really captures, I think, a realness and a rawness of what people experience when dealing with the law, with dealing with legal status, and looking at really how this can affect generations and also foster trauma. Thanks, Elizabeth.
Are you all able to see the screen, the video?
Yes.
Father went through some very difficult times, right?
Yes.
Can you walk me through that moment?
My dad was telling my sister, like, text my boss and tell him, like, if I don't come back, it's because I'm in jail. And I was so confused and I was like shocked and I was like, why are you going? And they didn't want to answer me. Maybe like a half hour later, they came and I decided to go out to see what was going on. And I kind of regret seeing it because it traumatized me so much.
What did you see?
My dad asked them if like they wanted to handcuff him, knowing that he was gonna get handcuffed. Like it was scary.
Do you remember when you came back to the house? What were you thinking?
It just felt so lonely. It just felt like something was missing. And I just tried to stay strong for my mom. But there was like no way because like my dad was gone. And there was times, many times where like I just had breakdowns where I would have anxiety attacks. And I didn't know how to control them. So that's how my mom like put me. And we started realizing that I actually needed like help, like professional help. I love you, Susan.
Sí, me encantaría si me puede explicar los dibujos.
En mis tiempos adentro, pues, yo hacía dibujos para mis hijos, para que no se olvidaran de mí. Pues les decía cuando los quería. Es feo que sufrieran mis hijos. Y pues quería alegrarlos un poco con un dibujo, con una carta. Hola, mi preciosa hija, sabes que todo el tiempo pienso en ti. Me estaba enfrentando muchos años en prisión, pero gracias a Dios comprobé mi inocencia y estoy con ellos.
¿Piensan que todavía tienen que vivir en la sombra, aunque usted ya volvió?
Sí, todavía.
When you guys see like a nice car, when you see a police car, when you hear a siren, what does that make you feel?
It's nerve-wracking. It's
Yeah.
like really nervous. Like it's scary. I remember when I first moved into this house, like the third day I fell down the stairs. And they were like, let's call the paramedics. Let's call it because I couldn't move. And I was like, no. I was in so much pain. But I was scared that if the police came and I don't know, like asked for my parents' identification or something, they would take them. But I preferred to be in pain than for them to call the paramedics.
¿Por qué decidieron pedir ayuda?
El verlas tan afectadas que era que ya no querían hablar, entonces empecé yo a decirles que tenían que hablar y empezar a soltar lo que sentían para que ellas pudieran sentirse un poco mejor con lo que estaban viviendo. Yo les dije, de hecho, si no querían hablar conmigo, a buscar a alguien donde ellas sintieran la suficiente confianza para expresar lo que sentían.
Pero particularmente con Brenda, ya que ha pasado por el programa de SIDS, ¿han visto cómo ha mejorado?
Sí.
Sí.
Bastante.
Sí, lo necesitan. Tanto los padres como tanto los hijos necesitamos ayuda. Necesitan ayudarnos.
Brenda and her family were able to seek help with counseling. But for many Latina teens around the US, access to mental health resources is just one of many barriers facing a demographic that has historically had elevated rates of anxiety and depression. According to the 2017 CDC Youth Risk Behavior Surveillance Report, 10.5% of Latina high school students in the US attempted suicide, compared to 7.3% of white females, 5.8% of Latino males, and 4.6% of white male teens. Dr. Carolina Hausman-Stabile is a professor of social work at Bryn Mawr College, who has dedicated her studies to analyzing what might be driving these numbers.
Some of the girls we talk to are first-generation Latinas, right? And they're carrying a lot of responsibility on their shoulders. Some of them come from parents that are undocumented, others are going to school for the first time. Is there something about this particular community that makes them more susceptible to mental health illnesses?
I would say that makes them more susceptible to anxiety in this very moment. Yes, we know that first gen, and especially first gen in mixed immigrational status families, meaning families whose parents might not be documented in the United States and children are, is putting a lot of pressure on this group and is increasing the number of anxiety to unseen levels. More than 50% of them report anxiety symptoms.
Is it fair to say young Latinas are going through a crisis?
I would say that there is a crisis among young Latinas in this context accelerated by the political factors. And then themselves, because of the normal adolescent development, are facing a lot of stress in a cultural context that also blames Latinos and stigmatizes being Latina. And in context of a lot of violence, we cannot expect that that will not result in negative health outcomes. Think of it, adolescents are demographically the healthiest group in any society. Suicidal behaviors indicate that the word is upside down.
Anais is a teenager.
Thank you, Elizabeth. All righty. The effects of not receiving adequate care and how this affects the community. Mental health screening tools used by prisons reproduce racial disparities. The results show that fewer Latinx people screen positive for mental illness or diagnoses, which leads to being under-referred and undetected while in the prison system. LA County jails are the largest mental health treatment facilities in California. And the US Census reported that 48.6% of LA County jails are Latino. The long-lasting effects of being incarcerated include denial of employment, housing, and educational opportunities. Disparities within treatment and healthcare. When it comes to navigating the healthcare system, 44% of Hispanics share that more communication problems from language and cultural differences lead to major reasons as to why they have worse health outcomes than non-Hispanic whites. For many Hispanics, a doctor-patient relationship needs to feel personal and welcoming. The discomfort with doctors intensifies when the conversation shifts to what is culturally taboo, including sexual health and mental illness. Latino males are 2.5 times more likely to have HIV than non-Hispanic white men. Shifting to COVID-19 and the global pandemic that we've all lived through, over 40% of Latinx people reported experiencing depressive symptoms during the pandemic. A study from 2021 found that those in the Latinx community reported more anxiety and stress, in addition to depression, as a result of the pandemic. The pandemic has exacerbated health inequities experienced by the Latinx community, as US reports continue to show a lack of access to adequate healthcare and mental health services. So where do we go from here? That is the million-dollar question. And that is why we're all here together in this room to think about and to put our heads together, right? To think about what resources are available to us, what solutions are available to us, and what we can do to help contribute to get the needle moving. Some resources that I've found and that I've compiled for all of you. My intention here was to try to touch on all ages. So if any of you are parents or care providers or guardians, you can watch things for yourself or with your friends, but also invite the conversations with people of all ages. What I've listed here, The Infiltrators, which is a documentary, is incredible. I recommend it to everyone. Real Women Have Curves, which is a phenomenal film that really gets to the womanhood of what it is to be Latina and growing up and within a family and owning one's identity and sexuality and what that experience is like. Encanto, which is, if you haven't seen it, I think it's such an amazing film. I saw it in the theater with my mom, and I think it's such an incredible story because it really captures so much of the community, right? I mean, you can look at that photo and you see all colors and shades, which is the truth of, when you really look at Latino and Hispanic communities, we look like everyone, right? And everything in between. but also on a deeper level, intergenerational trauma and how that can impact a family system. And in that movie specifically, you have a grandmother who experienced a death of her spouse while she was migrating. Okay. And that is where this kind of village is then created. How that then affects her children and her grandchildren as they feel the pressures of needing to live up to certain expectations, but also uphold certain standards and traditions. And I have more on that. I'd be more than happy to send you if you want to, incorporate that and have a larger conversation. And then Under the Same Moon, which is a movie about a mother who leaves Mexico to create a better life for her son, and what that experience was like living as an undocumented person in the US. Some books here: American Like Me by America Ferrera. I am a huge fan of America. This week in downtown by Union Square, I actually went to in New York City, I went to a panel discussion on intuition and what that is like for the feminine experience, how to own that, how to be attuned to it, how men can show up in those spaces, and also how we can practice being more attuned to our own intuition. But it was incredible to hear her share on her Honduran American life story and journey and experience, and how this connects to really everything that we're discussing here. And so she's phenomenal. That's a book. I Am Not Your Perfect Mexican Daughter, Wild Tongues Cannot Be Tamed, and Inventing Latinos. And lastly, on the resource list, I have some podcasts and apps here. Oye, which is to listen, that's the direct translation, is a bilingual format. So it's in English and in Spanish. It's an app that was created by J Balvin, who is a singer within the Latin community from Colombia, to really speak to mental health services and giving people tools at their fingertips to connect with grounding techniques and just being more present. Quien Are We? So Who Are We is a podcast in the thick, and Latina to Latina. So these are just different conversations and information that's out there, and important topics that are being covered. One other person I didn't list here, but Selena Gomez has done a lot of really meaningful and powerful work within the mental health community, and has also created, there's a website, she has an app as well called Wondermind, and is really working toward having larger impactful conversations about mental health, how it affects, yes, as she is her family's from Mexico, how that affects her specifically, but also having that conversation with the wider community here within the United States. And some web links that you're all going to be getting. So feel free to go down the rabbit hole and just learn, which is my favorite thing. Thank you so much, Elizabeth. I really appreciate it. And thank you so much for all of you being here. So important. And we'll turn it over to any questions or have a conversation.
Thank you, David, so much. And thank you for, being vulnerable and sharing about yourself and about your identities and intersectionalities. And I just think that it's so important that we can model, having these conversations and trying to be vulnerable in these spaces. So I appreciate you for doing that as well.
Thank you, Amanda.
So yeah, to start, does anybody have any questions or comments? I know I was like furiously scribbling in my own special handwriting notes as you were talking about just like different ideas that were coming up as you were speaking, but I'm curious if anybody else wants to jump in first. And yes, I see a hand. Luca?
Yes, hi, thank you so much.
Yeah.
So one of my questions is about, I'm in the Atlanta area, and I'm a social worker who works almost exclusively with transgender adolescents. And I have a few who a not insignificant number that came from Mexico. So they immigrated with their families when they were very young. And they have a lot of difficulty relating to how much they feel like they have difficulty relating to their family in Mexico, because a lot of what ties community relations together there and what brings people together is the church. And so this kiddo is really struggling. Well, both these kiddos are struggling to really connect with their family and feel that sense of connection. And so I'm wondering if there are resources for Catholic or transgender or both, like that they can have access to that would be in Spanish, because they still take a lot of pride in speaking Spanish within their house and within their family.
That's such a great question. And yes, there are resources out there, and I will be more than happy to connect. If you could put your email in the chat.
Oh, yes.
Or to connect with you and get that information over.
Thank you so much.
You're very welcome, and thank you for your question. And I want to thank you for the meaningful work that you're doing. We're the boots on the ground, right? So
Exactly.
sometimes it is hard work, and also it's so meaningful that you are a resource to individuals who need the help and the support. And I want that to be so open and known, and humanizing this experience, and really seeing that the church can be a protective factor, and it can also be a factor.
Yeah.
Right. And
Exactly.
it's the families, right, and that connectedness.
Mhm.
So I think that it's very important to meet these individuals where they're at, and do our best to understand the whole picture, right, which is their own story, and what it is that they're requesting or what they're sharing that they need. Also weighing that in contrast, right, to what that familial experience is.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. I put my email in there for you.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Any other questions, comments? Yes, honey. Hi, honey. It's good to see you.
Good to see you too, Amanda. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. Apologies that I was a little bit late. I too am working in the field and attended to a client. I just came from the EDGI conference, which was just in the last week. For those of you who don't know, it's an LGBTQ plus conference run every year in person again, focusing on beyond the 101 issues for the LGBTQ plus community. I would love to share some of those resources. One of them is Mama Has a Mustache. It's a great film that's out there. It's 15 minutes. So if you're looking for additional wonderful events, some people through COVID ate. This individual actually made this beautiful film with children and the spaces in schools, which leads me to a thought and a comment. And I don't know if it's a question because it's quite heavy, around the work that we do, the boots on the ground. But I tend to go to, and Amanda, you're aware of the agency having a social justice space, how we can address it, or what we can continue to do to address these things in policy issues and politics. I was raised that you never bring politics to the table, you keep it separate, but holy schmiggles, to not use any other words, I feel like I'm not part of the Latinx community. I'm a white Caucasian woman from colonial world. I just feel like we're under attack almost in terms of being able to have conversations in schools, our education. For crying out loud, there was a Dr. Phil episode, judge me if you wish, around LGBTQ plus and CRT issues discussed in schools, right? So I think I just wanted to say thank you for this space, but also a sharing of resources. I will also put my email, and Amanda has my contact information. But there's something of this policy, when you ask the question, how can we do, what can we do? I'm open to just how do we continue to address what for me feels like a tidal wave of let's go gender binary, let's go white supremacy, and it's happening in so many other countries. So I'm not pointing fingers to the United States alone here. And now I'm going to shut up.
Oh, honey, I mean, this is something that I think about often as a mental health provider. You know, when I'll speak for myself. When I went to school to get my degree in social work, I went because I wanted to help people, right? I wanted to do that individual work with people and do like clinical groups and all of that. But I went to be a clinician. And I think for myself, when I see the state of the world and I hear what our clients' lived experiences are on a day-to-day basis, being kids, being young adults, being adolescents in this world, especially our clients who part of their identities is being a part of different marginalized groups. I can't help but walk away feeling that as a mental health clinician, it is my responsibility to also try to impact policy, to advocate with our local elected officials at a state level, at a local level, at a federal level. But I'm not doing my job as a clinician if I'm also not speaking up and saying these policies from a mental health perspective are harmful, like period. And that we as a mental health community really need to be doing it because lives are at stake right now. There's places where it's not safe there's states where it's not safe to live for certain people and with certain identities. It's just not. So I just wanted to say that. David, I'm sure you have thoughts as well.
Yeah, look, I mean, I agree with everything. And I think it's such an important task, right? And an important duty that I think we all have to do our part. And I never want to like discredit or negate whatever impact it may be, however small it may feel to you or not. Like everything can help if I think you're willing to show up. I think so much of this conversation, and even, you know, for me, the importance of having this conversation with all of you is really to start those difficult conversations and bringing things out to the forefront that do need to be addressed, right? And that do need to be, I think, shared and reflected on. I see that there's value in understanding things as a human experience, right? All of us in this room can agree that there are, I'm sure, many similarities we can agree upon in terms of what's a human condition or human experience. We've all experienced sadness or joy. We know what it is to succeed or to fail, right? To some extent. But I also think that it's a great thing to honor and hold space for all of the differences that make us exactly who we are, that honor our life story, our journeys, where we come from, how we were raised, because in that we can celebrate difference and we can celebrate, I think, a community, right? That is not just one and the same and one built on like homogeny, but really working toward making a difference. And so I think this is just all part of it. And I thank you for raising that. I think, to Amanda, your point with policy, I think that's really important. And I think all of us, we have so much that we can do, whether it's electing officials who, you know, representation does matter. And looking around with the midterm elections coming, right? We have candidates who are out there running and sharing their stories and their message and the ways that they want to impact their communities. And I think whether it's sending a donation or whether it's rallying and showing up or making a phone call, I mean, these are grand gestures. And why? Because we often think it's commonplace to have a spare hour, but so many people choose to use that hour to take a nap or go, you know, to do something that we all live in the hustle and bustle, but we have more power within our hands and within our grasp than I think sometimes we give ourselves the credit for. Peter, I know you had your hand up as well.
I think Peter's hand was a mistake, he said in the chat,
Okay.
but I see Melissa's hand as well.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's so eye-opening and almost to the point where I feel like I'm still processing because, I mean, like your presentation indicates, like just like one set of information or one circumstance has this like massive ripple effect. So yeah. My question is based on your own personal experience, and also, being aware of this research and the statistics within the Latin community, how does that either affect or change or influence the way you work with clients within this community? Do you notice that you kind of do anything differently or take anything else into consideration when working with them?
Thanks for the question, Melissa. I appreciate it. I have to tell you that I bring all of that with me. It's part of who I am, right? For better, for worse, or indifferent, everything that I've gone through, I bring to my session, right? And I show up as me authentically. And I think that's a big part of this, right? And when I'm able to do that, I'm able to look at a problem and always coming into it solution oriented, but deconstructing that in ways that maybe sometimes are outside of the box. I was raised Catholic. I have heard things from the Catholic Church, or I've seen things, right? As I've grown up and been in different spaces, whether it's like a pride parade, for example, or even just seeing protests on like a college campus. I don't have like contempt for like the Catholic Church. I do have faith in my life, and I feel it's important for me. But I don't have that connected to something that I find to be flawed by just humanity, right? If we look at history, something like the church has been manipulated over and over again to justify, in some cases, wrongdoings. And for me, that's not like the purity of like what God is meant to be or what faith is. And so my relationship with the church is more, I would say, more positive, or with faith, with religion. And I recognize too, like familially, my family's very Catholic. You go into my mom's bedroom, there's a table in there with like every saint you could think of, and rosaries and all this and that, and the Bible. But when I came out, as an example, and I'm so happy that you asked this question, Melissa, because it brought me back to even friendships that I've made over the years. And when I came out, I was accepted by my family, and I'm so fortunate and so blessed, and I'd never take this for granted. But my story was different because while I think I know my father, who comes from Bolivia, very taboo there. I was recently there this summer. My family knows that I'm gay, but could we really talk about it? Like, yes and no. Like, yes, we did, but then we didn't at the same time. But the point that I'm making is just to say I was blessed and fortunate to have been embraced and celebrated. Even my grandparents, and that is something I never take for granted. But I bring that into my sessions because I have to also have the wits about myself to know, for some clients who want to come out, but their families are not that accepting, or perhaps maybe won't celebrate them, for their safety, for their security, for maybe, unfortunately, depending on the circumstances, they may be financially dependent. Maybe that's not the best move at this moment in time, though we can still celebrate your truth in so many other ways. And connecting back to the whole like machismo side, which comes from, again, Latin America, I have two friends that I know of who have moved here from Brazil seeking asylum because they are gay identifying, and they have had so many challenges and barriers home, where they were almost kind of like exiled, and forced to leave. And they came to this country for safety, and so that they can be something as pure and as innocent of just like being who you are. So I always think about these things, and I always bring it into everything that I do with like the fullest heart and the best of intentions.
That was beautiful. Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's, one thing that I think about so much, and it's an area of that I've spent so much time reading about and studying about is countertransference. And, we bring ourselves into the room with our clients and our whole selves, whether we want to or not. Like, this concept of a blank slate is, I don't know even what that means, because we are all of our identities. And, sort of along the lines with what Melissa was saying is, what do we do? And also for those of us who work in agency settings where the clients are a part of a bigger community as well, like how does it impact us and what we're bringing with our own identities to the table when we experience or witness microaggressions even committed by, our clients in the community against each other, or just in general, how that impacts us as people, how that impacts us as therapists, how that impacts other clients, and then what do we do clinically when that happens? Because what we do know is that, white folks have had safe spaces to get mental health treatment. People of color have not. And when a space is becoming unsafe, that was supposed to be safe, what do we do in that moment for our clients?
Absolutely. Steve is asking the question in the chat, why should mental health care professionals and providers take an interest in this topic? And what do they need to become competent in this area?
You got it, David?
Yeah, I got it. I'm going to break it down. Okay. Why should mental health care professionals and providers take an interest in this topic? Because you can't always control who's coming through the door. And at least it's my philosophy that I want to be best prepared for whoever is walking in to be able to treat them and to show up for them so that I can help. And I would hope that we can all kind of agree, right, to that philosophy of just helping others. I think that's a call to action that a lot of us have been drawn to this field for. What do you need to become competent in this area? I think that starts anywhere. I'm trained in DBT. I often do a training on like mindfulness. And one of the things I always say is that, when we talk about mindfulness, sometimes people get lost in the idea that you need to sign up for a yoga class or go to a structured setting to practice it. But you don't. You can practice mindfulness in the shower, enjoying a good aroma of shampoo. You could practice it in the car with the radio on or off, and my point in saying that is, it can start with reading a book. It can start with having a conversation. It can start by volunteering. It can start by, getting on YouTube and looking up a good video or like, the Vice documentary, for an example, that speaks to a specific, point of interest. And there are many. It starts with you making the decision and the choice that you want to learn a little bit more about something maybe you don't know, and be open to whatever it is that you learn along the way and in that journey. Because I think oftentimes too, a lot of what I've even covered in this discussion and presentation, what I know is that sometimes ignorance comes from fear, right? Fear of the unknown. And from that, sometimes we reject things before we give it an opportunity to understand and to learn about it. And so I invite you to think of a book, or look at some of the resources that I've shared. If you want to put your email in the chat, I'd be more than happy to send you some other links for things, and even keep the conversation going. And I'd be happy to do it with you.
Thank you, David. I think it's so important as mental health professionals to always be curious about what we don't know, and not assume that we know, because we don't, even if you're coming into a clinical situation or relationship with somebody that you share an identity or identities with, it doesn't mean that your lived experience is the same as theirs. And the second that we stop being curious about that person's or somebody else's own lived experience is the second that we are closed off to, the potential about learning about experiences that are different than our own. So that embracing curiosity, accepting that we don't know, and being curious about that, and being grateful that we get the opportunity to learn. I am mindful of time. We have a couple of minutes, but I always like to give people a break before their next commitment. If there's any other questions, please raise your hand right now. If not, I know that oftentimes, especially with presentations on this topic, it can take time to process everything that's been presented. And then tonight, as you're going to bed, or tomorrow morning, you realize, oh, I wish I would have asked this, or I wish I would have asked that. If that happens, please email us, because we love continuing the dialogue as well. And this is an open dialogue that we would love to continue. So please reach out. And thank you so much, David, for your vulnerability and all the wonderful information that you shared.
Thank you. It was my pleasure. And everyone, please know the information doesn't end here, right? This is like an ongoing conversation and a snippet of what we can touch on. So I hope that this was enticing and inspiring for you to look up some stuff on your own and get involved. Thank you so much for your time and attention.
Thank you.
Take care, everyone.